Anyway, I've talked too long. I've talked about the problems. We've done this conservation plan. Basically what we're doing now is preparing essentially a report card for the 35 most studied springs in the state. This is the list of them. It's in that plan. You can get a copy over there. It turns out over half of the springs in the state got a D or less in terms of their grades. In other words, they flunked. If you consider a D a flunking grade, which I did when I was in school, they flunked. That they have severe problems either with their flow reductions, their increased salt content, or their increased nitrogen content. And only a few springs got A's, and 75% were below a B minus, so C or C, D, or F. And we're going to continue to do this. We're gathering together all the data that's being collected on the springs in databases, and we're going to update this hopefully every year so that we have a running record of are the springs getting better or are they getting worse. And if the press would pick this up and run with it, they'd have a pretty good story, because it isn't very good. And the press is really tired really of reporting on springs because they've been doing it for over a decade and it hasn't made any difference. They're still hearing me and others yell that this isn't enough. We're not doing enough to protect our springs. And it's kind of frustrating after decades of doing this, but nevertheless, it needs to be done. There is a way to restore these springs much less expensively. It doesn't have to cost the public anything other than a very nominal fee for water. Everybody should be paying for groundwater. All groundwater uses should be monitored. That means every private well should have a gauge on it. I have one on my farm for my private well. They're very inexpensive. Every house in Ocala's got a meter in front of it. It's just a matter of putting a meter on every water supply and somebody reading those meters and reporting them. And everybody should be charged for something for water. That would raise the money to correct all the problems here. And the biggest effect would be on the biggest profit, the people making the biggest profits, which are the industrial farms, the industrial livestock operations, the industrial facilities in general. They would be paying the biggest amount because they use the most water. They use so much water. Now, Dina, we fought tooth and toenail, and with our personal treasure, we fought the states millions of dollars to stop permits that ultimately ended up to be about a total of 4 million gallons a day or something like that. No, just 2.5 total. They started out wanting 20-some million gallons a day, more than twice the water that Ocala uses for the cattle operation. We fought them down to 2.5. They got that, but still 2.5 million gallons a day is enough water for like 100,000 people. And they got it for free. And the state defended them. The state brought in their own outside experts as well as their own staff to fight the public. And there was not a single comment. They got over 3,000 comments over the first permit at the district, and none of them were in support of the project, and that didn't make any difference. The state still fought us. They actually intimidated our petitioners. They actually just used underhanded methods to defeat us. They changed the model after their staff concluded that there wasn't enough water for another permit. They came back and changed the model and somehow found 20 million gallons a day of more water to give away. I'm sorry, but I'm mad. I'm really mad, and I don't have much more time to fight. But are we going to win or are we going to lose? And I wish we would win. But anyway, if we put a cap and a fee on water withdrawal and on nitrogen, we could solve all these problems without hurting anybody except a few businesses. They're getting that water for free or polluting for free. There's a law actually in Florida that polluter pays, and it was developed for South Florida. It was quickly undercut by other laws when they realized what it meant. Because agriculture, sugar, was totally opposed to it in South Florida. But they actually passed a law that said the polluter should pay. And now what we have is a law that says that agriculture can do whatever it needs to do to make a profit. That's the law right now. Yes, ma'am?
So this affordable solution, how far up is it gone?
It's gone into books. And it has, we've gone up to the legislature every year and proposed that they put in at least a study of putting a fee on water. The state did a study back when Governor Martinez was in office. They found that it was not going to hurt the economy at all. They actually had a national investment firm do a study of it. Agriculture killed it then, and agriculture still rules our legislature. The lobbyists that we're against are unbelievable, and they're all paid for by either development or agriculture.
And there's no way to get in a
Well, it's
side
hard
door,
when
back
there's
door.
300 lobbyists up there for pro-development, pro these industries, and there's 2 or 3 lobbyists for the environment. That's, you know, how can you fight that? That's where the money is, and the money gets more and more concentrated in the people that, you know, are getting this water for free.
Sugar is a larger, spends more on lobbying than oil. Sugar has so much power.
Well, let me wrap. You got it.
How do you propose to get this to the average person, that this is our drinking water? It's not only just our springs, it's our drinking
I
water.
propose to have you help me do it. I tell you, having some new faces here, you know, there's not nearly enough of us. I mean, I go to meetings. I was at a meeting last night of horse people down in the villages, and you know, there's 50 people there wanting to hear about horse things. My wife wrote a book about growing up with horses, and so we were there. But there's thousands of people at other meetings I go to that have nothing to do with the springs. And this is something that affects all of us. You tell me how to get it. I haven't been successful, other than raising the whole issue. Come on in, Rob. You want to let him in, Susan? The whole issue of springs was not in the public eye before the Florida Springs Institute. And it's really, that's one thing we've done, is we've gotten a lot of awareness, not nearly enough. But in South Florida, they hadn't heard of the springs before this. Now we're getting invited to speak at the Everglades Conference each year. And we don't even think much about the Everglades, but that's all they think about down there, and that's where most of the population in the state is. And there's getting a lot of money down there, but that doesn't mean the Everglades is being saved. Throwing money at a problem is the state's way of avoiding doing something. It's a lot cheaper to throw some money at the problem and continue to make those profits than it is to cut and actually do the right thing. Susan?
One more problem to throw at you. What do you think of the proposed 3 major
I don't
arteries?
even want to think about it. I don't even want to think. Obviously, yeah, that's all a developer's trick to open up lands for development. It's obvious what it is. I'm sure it'll happen. Has anybody ever stopped a road before in the state? You know, the money is going to be there. I'm pretty sure it's going to happen.
Majority of the impact on the springs be? Will that be on the
I think the impact will be no different than agriculture up there. I showed you the footprint of agriculture is enormous on the springs. Building a road near the springs doesn't kill a spring. Putting a lot of people there, or putting a very intensive industrial or agricultural operation there, that's what kills the springs. So it's not a personal battle of mine. You know, we've signed on to the Springs Council's thing that Ryan sent out yesterday. But, you know, silver's dying now. Silver's been dying for the last 25, 30 years.
Yep.
And a road over on the West Coast is not going to kill silver any faster. But it's dying now. And just wait for the next drought to see it, if you don't believe me. But the district is still issuing permits. They got the minimum flow and level rule that allows them to keep issuing permits until Silver Springs is dry. That rule has nothing to do with the flow in Silver Springs. It's all based on the level of water in Silver Springs. And it's been shown now over a long period of time that the level stays the same regardless, pretty much regardless of the flow. And there still will be water in that floodplain even when there's no flow in Silver Springs. There'll be a stagnant lake again. And that's the University of Florida study. That's one of the things it showed, is that the sediments in Silver River were laid down when that was basically a lake. And so, I mean, that's an emergency to me. And I could only fight so many battles, so I'm not going to fight the turnpikes. But it's obvious what it's for. It's to develop the last scrap of land, of open land in Florida, because people can make more money off of the villages than they can off of ag fields. And so it's a way of extracting more value from the land. And that's what we'll have. We'll just have a number of village type developments moving up through Florida, at least for a while. I won't tell you why I'm optimistic. I mean, I'm optimistic because it's all gonna end someday anyway. But that's how far ahead I'm looking. But everybody in the state does support clean water. I don't know anybody in the state that hates springs. These people that are killing our springs are doing it not intentionally, they're doing it for capitalistic reasons of making more money. And you really wonder how much money do some people need to be happy. There's basically no limit in greed. That's just one of those human traits that I think all of us have some of. And the reason we have government is to put a curb on that, to stop that, and to protect the public's good. And that's what we're not seeing. We do not have a government in Florida that is very interested in protecting the good of all the public. And that's what needs to be changed. And voting will eventually do that if our voting system isn't totally corrupted too, which, it's really easy to be pessimistic these days. And it's not easy to be optimistic, but that doesn't mean we should stop. If you saw your own child dying from lack of blood and poison, then you would fight to the death for it. And I'm basically saying to people more and more that we need to be fighting to the death for these springs because they are the living heart of Florida. And we've got to get that message across, however you can do it.
Well, you put it this way, and so I think of it, is that what are we doing to preserve the environment for our grandchildren?
Not enough.
Nothing, exactly. I mean, that's it. I mean, you have to think.
That's totally why I'm in this. I
Uh-huh.
have 5 grandchildren. I have 3 children. I've contributed to the population boom in Florida in my own way, and I apologize for it. But that's the reality, and their future is not looking bright. We are, they say, kicking the can down the road. We are passing the bill to our kids and our grandkids for all this. They're the ones that are going to take the hit on this stuff.
And they're the ones
much
that's-
more than we are. Our generation, we have just lived through a golden age of rising economic growth this whole time. Well, everything that goes up comes down.
Well,
This cannot be sustained.
and they're going to ask us, Whiskey Tango Foxtrot, what were you doing?
Yeah, they're not.
Yeah,
They're not
yeah.
going to ask us. They're going to burn us at the stake.
Yeah.
I hope. That's what we deserve. So anyway, we all support clean water. Look how many people show up at the Capitol to support clean water, about 100, 200. We have great help, great allies, and I turn to Dr. Rob Smith over there, who is our artist illustrator, produced this wonderful thing. This book is like our restoration plans, but it's for either somebody that's really old or somebody that's really young. It's sort of, everybody colors nowadays. So it's an activity book that tells you everything about the Springs Department. And you can get that at Springs Institute. And then I've written a book. I got a couple copies here, but you can order them from the Springs Institute if you really want to be depressed. It makes great nighttime reading, helps you sleep. And John's got a book too. You can read his book if you need some more help.
I don't want to sleep at all. Just to depress people even more, 1,000 Friends in their study with the University of Florida estimate that we have another 15 million people heading this way in the next 30 years.
Yeah.
In 2005, we had about 50 million tourists. 2 years ago, it was 110 million.
Yeah.
And state government has state funds to promote even more tourism.
And that's not counting the 15 million people who live in South Florida that are going to move up to Central Florida.
That's right.
That's not even
Yeah.
counting
Yes.
1,000 friends.
The problems you identify are, the problems are going to get worse. I don't
Yeah.
think the solutions are going to grow even.
Right, but there are solutions.
Yeah.
I tell you, if we would charge for water, if we had equitable things that were really, if we had leaders that were interested in the public good and not their bottom line, we would not have a problem here.
But one last thing, could
We
you
need new
just spend in a
leadership.
minute or so telling how sea level rise is already affecting McCullough Springs?
McCullough Springs is, has anybody been to McCullough in the group? Well, most of you have. McCullough Springs is about 12 miles from the Gulf of Mexico. It's tied to a very large spring group called Springs Creek. If you go straight south from McCullough Springs down to the coast, you come to Springs Creek, a little sleepy fishing village, where there was a spring that used to flow close to 1,000 CFS in the past, or more. Highest measured flow of any spring system in the state for an instantaneous flow. Those two are tied together by a system of caves and conduits that have been mapped now by courageous divers that'll stay down over 30 hours on a dive underwater and have traveled miles and miles. They've mapped all those, tied them together. And what is happening as sea level rises, the gradient for groundwater is rising down at the coast. So sea level rises, that means the aquifer rises down at the coast. And there's salt water coming in that cave. And instead of coming from Tallahassee downhill to the coast, water now is moving up gradient. Salt water is moving up gradient in those caves. And that's pushing fresh water into Wakulla that didn't used to come into Wakulla. There are several what we call swallets or sinking streams in the Apalachicola Forest on the west side of Wakulla County. And those, in the past, put their dark tannic water into the aquifer through these sinkholes, and it would flow to the coast. And you wouldn't even notice down at Springs Creek because it was the Gulf of Mexico. It wasn't clear water down there. But you could see the dark water coming out. That dark water now is coming out of Wakulla Springs because the city of Tallahassee has pumped the aquifer down. They're pumping over 25 million gallons a day in Tallahassee. That's pumped the aquifer surface down, the sea level has raised it, and now the gradient, not all the time, but a lot of the time now, the gradient is back towards Wakulla Springs. So Wakulla is the only spring in the state that's got a rising flow, but it's dark water. So Wakulla that used to be clear about 89% of the time now is clear less than 10% of the time. So the glass bottom boats don't even run there anymore. And the fish and wildlife are just disappearing from Wakulla. Because dark water is not good for productivity of plants or making food for the animals. So it's amazing, and that's the one success story the state can point out, that the flow's going up and the nitrate's going down. Why is the nitrate going down? Because we're getting that water from Apalachicola Forest, the tannic water that's not polluted like water from Tallahassee. So that's their one success story. The dying spring, and we've gone and studied it and did an updated baseline of it. I've studied it twice now, and it's dying. I mean, its productivity's down, its fish populations are down, its plant communities are depauperate. It's lost a lot of major things that made it really special. It's clarity. So anyway, more good news. Silver is in one of the springs in the best shape still in the state. Silver has a lot of potential to be restored, but it means some serious changes to groundwater pumping, and not just in Ocala. The city of Ocala has actually allowed themselves to be told by the district that if they just pump, if they put their wells deeper, they can get water that won't affect the springs. If you believe that, you know, I'll sell you some land in the Everglades. You know, the aquifer is all tied together. The upper and the lower Florida are all the same. They connect in lots of different places. And so if you pump out of the lower Florida, that lowers the upper Florida, which lowers the flow of Silver Springs. And that's just a lie. There's continuing issue permits. Like I said, they just changed their model, and we fought them on this. I just got off the phone with Todd Kincaid. That's what I was in the car screaming about, because he and I were the experts on that challenge, and we lost. And it was embarrassing as hell to be so right and to lose in an administrative hearing. The judge just could not understand how flawed that model was that we described to him. Expect things to get worse before they get better, but they won't get better unless we fight for what's ours. And ours, a great environment. Florida is something you love. Yes.
What is the one thing that each of the groups could do to make a difference? You know, if you have a horse farm, is there one thing that?
Well, with animal husbandry, it's hard. You basically have to reduce your density of animals or find another use, you know, replace any fertilizer use with manure. And I know some horse farms fertilize their pastures and others don't. So
not fertilizing.
Use and reuse is always helpful. Reuse water, use less water. You know, personally, when my son bought a water meter for my farm, and I put it on, my wife and I cut our water use in half immediately when we saw how much water we were using. And it's very easy to do that, it turns out, without sacrificing anything. Yeah, I haven't sacrificed. It still smells good. So you can do your laundry, you can take a long shower, you know. But there's things that we all need to do, but there's so many of us that there's nothing that we individually can do that will make the difference, except for people like the farmers who, if they could switch, if they could take a lower profit, then they could switch from intensive row crop to longleaf pine forest and have no impact on them. Or they could just take half of their land out of production instead of putting more and more land into production. And what we're seeing is more and more irrigation going in all the time. Georgia has just fallen in love with center pivots. It's not just Florida now, it's spread into Georgia, and they're pumping another 1 billion gallons a day of water from the aquifer that used to feed our springs.
When you say center pivot.
You know what the
those
big
things.
irrigation system, yeah. Those are incredible water users, some up to 1 million gallons a day.
But they get reimbursed for putting them in.
And they
from
actually, the government
local water
pays
board.
part of the expense for this. Yeah, now it's just, I'm sorry. I gotta stop, Susan.
Well, I was gonna say, one solution is to monitor and select elected officials that listen to presentations like this and read books on the issue and then follow through on it. Our elected officials are generally ignorant, either willfully or accidentally on the
Bob,
issue.
before
And we
you-
need to educate them and then vote for people that support these.
They were invited to come tonight.
Before and after.
They're always invited to come to all kinds of presentations like this and events like this. And when do you see your county commissioners? When do you see your city officials?
Election time.
You never see
Oh,
them.
not even election time. They don't show up in,
So,
not here.
So thank you for your attention.
That's what would be good about the education center talking about, so more and more people are coming to Silver Springs again, and if it was right there, people could stop in and learn about that the springs, that is our drinking water, and what their impacts are. It would be such a good spot for it. Who has to approve that?
Oh, everybody, the Park Service, obviously, and DEP is over the Park Service.
How do we
and
help?
Governors of DEP, so it's got to be approved all the way up. But we've got the green light from the Park Service and from DEP.
How can we help that, Bob?
Well, just come out. I'm going to be, we're getting our preliminary architectural plans, you know, just the money plan, they call it, the money drawing, you know, where you take it around and show it to people. This is what we're going to build. This is what we're going to build.
Right.
So we're getting that very soon, and I'm going to be starting to hold public meetings down here, trying to raise interest and support and funding ultimately. We need to find several $1 million. I mean, the state's not going to give us a cent to do it. And they'd be glad for us to build a building on their state park land that they own.
Sure.
But it would be like the Silver River Museum. That's, you know, totally the school board.
Yeah.
But we're getting support from the Chamber of Commerce, from the school board, superintendent of schools, from the Silver River Museum, from other groups, and we'll continue to build that support. Nobody's against it so far. The state is a little bit hesitant when I speak up a little loudly, but they know it's the right thing, and they really want to increase visitation in Silver Springs. And what I'm promising them is we'll get it up to 1 million people a year and get 500 manatees a year in there as soon as they get rid of the Rodman Reservoir. And that leads us to our next presentation. Yeah.